Linux Mint is a 32 and 64-bit Linux distribution for desktop computers, based on either Ubuntu or Debian. Its stated aim is to be a modern, elegant and comfortable operating system which is both powerful and easy to use. Mint provides full out-of-the-box multimedia support by including some proprietary software such as Adobe Flash. Mint's motto is "From freedom came elegance." New versions of Linux Mint have been released approximately every 6 months. The first release, named Ada, was released in 2006. The 17th release, Qiana, was released on May 31, 2014. Support for older releases usually ends shortly after the next version is released, but there have been releases with long-term support, with v17x supported for 5 years, ending in April 2019. History: Linux Mint started in 2006 with a beta release of version 1.0, codenamed Ada, based on Ubuntu. Following its release, version 2.0 Barbara was the first version to use Ubuntu as its codebase. Mint had few users from these early versions until the release of 3.0, Cassandra. Version 2.0 was based on Ubuntu 6.10, using its package repositories and using it as a codebase. From there, Linux Mint followed its own codebase, building each release from its previous one, but it continued to use the package repositories from the latest Ubuntu release. As such, the distribution never really forked. This resulted in making the base between the two systems almost identical, and it guaranteed full compatibility between the two operating systems. In 2008, Linux Mint adopted the same release cycle as Ubuntu and dropped its minor version number before releasing version 5 Elisa. The same year, in an effort to increase the compatibility between the two systems, Linux Mint decided to abandon its code base and changed the way it built its releases. Starting with version 6 for Elisa, each release was now completely based on the latest Ubuntu release, built directly from it, timed for approximately 1 month after the corresponding Ubuntu release. In 2010, Linux Mint released Linux Mint Debian Edition. Unlike the other Ubuntu-based editions, it is a rolling release based directly on Debian GNU Linux and is not tied to Ubuntu packages or its release schedule. Releases: there have been 2 Linux Mint releases per year, generally timed 1 month after Ubuntu releases. Each version of Linux Mint is given an integer version number and is codenamed with a female first name ending in A, and beginning with a letter of the alphabet that increases with every iteration. Since the mid-2008 v5, every 4th release has been labeled a long-term support version, indicating that it is supported for longer, 3 years for v5 and v9, and 5 years thereafter. Linux Mint 17 Qiana LTS was released on May 31, 2014, remaining current until the end of November 2014 and supported until April 2019. In July 2014 it was announced that Linux Mint 17 LTS was the first release of the 17X series, and that for 2 years applications would be backported to 17X, with security updates until 2019. The next release was announced to be 17.1. Linux Mint does not communicate specific release dates, as new versions are published when ready, meaning that they can be released early when the distribution is ahead of schedule or late when critical bugs are found. New releases are announced, with much other material, on the Linux Mint blog. The Cinnamon and Mate ISO images of v17 initially released had some problems, and v2 ISO respins, with v2 in the file name, were released. Features: Linux Mint primarily utilizes free and open-source software, making exceptions for some proprietary software, such as plugins and codecs that provide Adobe Flash, MP3, and DVD playback. Linux Mint's inclusion of proprietary software is a bit unusual. Many Linux distributions do not include proprietary software by default, as a common goal for Linux distributions is to adhere to the model of free and open-source software. Linux Mint comes with a wide range of software installed that includes LibreOffice, Firefox, Thunderbird, XCHAT, Pigeon, Transmission, GIMP, and Cheese. Additional software that is not installed by default can be downloaded using the package manager. Linux Mint allows networking ports to be closed using its firewall, with customized port selection available. The default Linux Mint desktop environments, Mate and Cinnamon, support many languages. Linux Mint can also run many programs designed for Microsoft Windows, using the Wine Windows Compatibility Layer software for Linux, or virtualization software, including VMware Workstation and VirtualBox. As of version 16 there is an issue with multi-monitor support and Wine. Linux Mint is available with a number of desktop environments to choose from, including the default Cinnamon Desktop, Mate, KDE, and XFCE. Other desktop environments can be installed via apt, Synaptic, or via the custom Mint software manager. Linux Mint actively develops software for its operating system. Most of the development is done in Python and the source code is available on GitHub. Software developed by Linux Mint. Cinnamon, a fork of GNOME Shell based on the innovations made in Mint GNOME Shell extensions. Released as an add-on for Linux Mint 12 and available as a default desktop environment since Linux Mint 13. Mint Tools, Software Manager, runs Mint files, which are files containing instructions to install packages. From Linux Mint 6 this tool can download information on all the applications on the Mint software portal for offline viewing. Also enables installation of any of the programs listed directly from the desktop, instead of going to the site. The option to use the old Mint install program is available. From the Ubuntu repositories or the getdeb.net website may be searched. Update Manager, designed to prevent inexperienced users from installing updates that are unnecessary or require a certain level of knowledge to configure properly. It assigns updates a safety level, based on the stability and necessity of the update. Updates can be set to notify users, be listed but not notify, or be hidden by default. In addition to including updates specifically for the Linux Mint distribution, the development team tests all package-wide updates. Main menu, a menu of options including filtering, installation and removal of software, system and places links, favorites, session management, editable items, custom places and many configuration options. Also ported to Mate and Linux Mint 12. Backup tool, enables the user to backup and restore data. Data can be backed up before a fresh install of a newer release, then restored. Upload Manager defines upload services for FTP, SFTP and SCP servers. Services are then available in the system tray and provide zones where they may be automatically uploaded to their corresponding destinations. Domain Blocker, a basic domain blocking parental control tool introduced with v6. Enables the user to manually add domains to be blocked system-wide. Desktop Settings, a tool for configuration of the desktop. Welcome Screen, introduced in Linux Mint 7, an application that starts on the first login of any new account. It provides links to the Linux Mint website, user guide and community website. Remastering Tool, a tool for remastering Linux Mint. It is not installed by default in any Linux Mint edition, but is included in the repositories and used by the developers for creating ISO files. Users can use this tool to create their own distribution based on Linux Mint. Mint GNOME Shell extensions, a desktop layer on top of GNOME 3 to make it feel like GNOME 2, still popular within the Linux community when GNOME 3 was introduced. Includes a bottom panel, an application menu, the window list, task-centric desktop and system tray icons. This was included in Linux Mint in version 12. Installation. Linux Mint can be run without installation from a live CD. It can also be installed onto a computer from the CD for a significant performance improvement, once confirmed compatible, using the provided Ubiquity installer. Installation CD images can be downloaded without charge, or installation CDs purchased. Linux Mint can be booted and run from a USB flash drive on any PC capable of booting from a USB drive, with the option of saving settings to the flash drive. A USB Creator program is available to install a Ubuntu Live Linux Mint on a USB drive. The Microsoft Windows Migration Assistant tool can be used to import bookmarks, desktop background, and various settings from an existing Windows installation into a new Linux Mint installation. The Windows installer Mint for Win allows Linux Mint to be installed from within Microsoft Windows, much like the WUBI installer for Ubuntu. The operating system could then be removed, as with other Windows software, using the Windows Control Panel. This method requires no partitioning of the hard drive. It is only useful for Windows users, and is not meant for permanent installations because it incurs a slight performance loss. This installer was included on the Live CD until Linux Mint 16, but removed in the Linux Mint 16 Petra release because the size of the Live CD images would have exceeded what the software could reliably handle. Installation supports a logical volume manager with automatic partitioning only, and disk encryption since Linux Mint 15. UTF-8, the default character encoding, supports a variety of non-Roman scripts. Upgrading, updates to packages are frequently released. Linux Mint by default checks for updates and offers to install them. When a complete new release of Linux Mint is issued, a user has several options. Do nothing. It is suggested that a system working satisfactorily need not be upgraded. Backup data and installed programs using Mint Backup, overwrite the existing installation with the latest Mint, restore backups. Customization must be redone, and any software not from the repositories must be reinstalled. This is said to be safe, fast, reliable, and easy. The resulting system may differ in appearance or behavior from the earlier one. If there are new hardware incompatibility or other issues, the previous version can be reinstalled. Pointing the Synaptic Package Manager at the repositories of the newer release and performing a full upgrade. Compared to a backup and full reinstall, this is slow, less reliable, and may bring package conflicts and complex dependencies that must be resolved. The process is automatic. The end result is a system that looks and behaves as it did before. While backup is not required as part of the procedure, upgrading without backing up can cause loss of data in case of problems. Install the latest version from the CD into the same directory as the existing one, with some minor adjustments. Settings and standard software will be preserved. Any installed PPA or other special repository software will have to be reinstalled. Additions: Linux Mint has multiple versions that are based upon Ubuntu, with various desktop environments available. Linux Mint also has a version based upon Debian. The table below shows the default environments, not those available. Ubuntu-based editions: as of Linux Mint 17 there are two main editions of Linux Mint, developed by the core development team and using Ubuntu as a base. One includes Mint's own Cinnamon as the desktop environment while the other uses Mate. Linux Mint also develops editions that feature the KDE and XFCE desktop environments by default, but these have secondary priority and are generally released somewhat later than the two main editions. OEM version: the distribution provides an OEM version for manufacturers to use. No codecs version: the distribution provides a no codecs version, previously known as the Universal Edition, for magazines, companies and distributors in the USA, Japan and countries where the legislation allows patents to apply to software, and distribution of restricted technologies may require the acquisition of third-party licenses. Multimedia codecs can be installed at any time via a link on the Mint welcome screen or a desktop launcher available for only no codecs version. Linux Mint Debian Edition: Linux Mint Debian Edition is based directly on Debian testing, instead of Ubuntu, but is designed to provide the same functionality and look and feel as the Ubuntu-based edition. LMDE is available with a Mate and Cinnamon desktop environments. LMDE has a semi-rolling release development model. Debian testing is a real rolling release that constantly receives updates. LMDE periodically introduces a OE update packs which are tested snapshots of Debian testing. LMDE lists its advantages and disadvantages over the Ubuntu-based distribution. Installing update packs keeps LMDE current, without the need to reinstall the system every 6 months as with Ubuntu-based distros. LMDE has its own package repositories. It is also possible to track the Debian testing or unstable repos directly, at users' risk. LMDE is faster and more responsive than Ubuntu-based editions. LMDE requires a deeper knowledge and experience with Linux, DPKG and APT. Debian is less user-friendly and desktop-ready than Ubuntu, with some rough edges. System requirements: Linux Mint 16 Petra has the following system requirements: 32-bit Intel x86 and 64-bit 64 Armenian drams architectures are supported. A supported GPU is required for visual effects. Development: individual users and companies using the operating system act as donors, sponsors and partners of the distribution. Linux Mint relies on user feedback to make decisions and orient its development. The official blog often features discussions where users are asked to voice their opinion about the latest features or decisions implemented for upcoming releases. Ideas can be submitted, commented upon and rated by users via the Linux Mint community website. The community of Linux Mint users use Launchpad to participate in the translation of the operating system and in reporting bugs. Most extraneous development is done in Python and organized online on GitHub, making it easy for developers to provide patches, to implement additional features or even to fork Linux Mint subprojects. With each release, features are added that are developed by the community. In Linux Mint 9 for instance, the ability to edit menu items is a feature that was contributed by a Linux Mint user. The members of the development team are spread around the world and they communicate through private forums, emails and IRC. Linux Mint reviews are tracked by the distribution and discussed by the development team and the community of users. Package classification: Linux Mint divides its software repositories into 4 main channels that reflect differences in their nature and in their origin. Main provides only software that is developed by Linux Mint. Upstream provides software which is present in Ubuntu but patched or modified by Linux Mint. As a result, the software provided by this channel behaves differently in each distribution. Notable examples are Grub, Plymouth, Ubiquity, XCHAT, USB Creator and Yelp. Import provides software that is not available in Ubuntu or for which no recent versions are available in Ubuntu. Notable examples are Opera, Picasa, Skype, Songbird, the 64-bit Adobe Flash plugin and FrostWire. Romeo, not enabled by default. Provides test packages before they are promoted to other channels. As such, it represents the unstable branch of Linux Mint. Additionally, there is a backport channel for ports of newest software to older releases without affecting the other channels. It is not enabled by default. Reception: Linux Mint has been praised for focusing on desktop users. In 2012, Linux Mint surpassed Ubuntu as the most viewed distribution on DistroWatch. In a 2012 online poll at Lifehacker, Linux Mint was voted the best Linux distribution after Ubuntu, with around 16% of the votes. In issue 162, Linux Format named Mint the best distro for 2012. In issue 128, Linux user and developer gave Linux Mint 15 a score of 5/5. Stating, "We haven't found a single problem with the distro. We're more than satisfied with the smooth, user-friendly experience at Linux Mint 15, and Cinnamon 1.8 provides for it to be our main distro for at least another 6 months." See also, List of Linux Mint releases, references. External links, official website, official blog, Linux Mint development blog. Linux Mint at DistroWatch.